Now we're going to hear about growing perennial crops, research that's been done by Aaron Guman and Graham Unangst-Rufenacht. Take it away.
Thanks, Vern, and hey, everybody. My name is Graham Unangst-Rufenacht, and you'll soon be meeting my friend and business partner, or research partner at this point, Aaron Guman. The focus of this project was really on trying to get people more familiar with some perennial crops, which we feel are, potentially close to commercial crop production ready, and trying to lower those barriers. So the purpose of this project was to grow and research Seakale in particular, Cranberry maritima, and to develop accessible tools and outreach in order to facilitate and encourage its familiarity in commercial and community adoption among producers, chefs, and the general public. Our goals are to address primary barriers to adoption for this perennial vegetable, and other perennial vegetables by conducting research trials and providing outreach to farmers with our results. So this would also include the development of a commercial crop growing guide and enterprise analysis you'll hear a little bit more about later. And this research has been done over 4 growing seasons and has been supported by SARE and by the Specialty Crop Block Grant. And we can go to the next slide and I'll pass it to Aaron.
Thanks. Thanks, Graham. Hi, everybody. As Graham was saying, we focused on a few different plants, but the focus of our presentation today in our SARE grant is Seakale. Again, the Latin name there was Cranberry maritima. And Seakale is a spreading, clump-forming perennial that grows up to 3 feet tall and wide, or wider than that, as we found. It has this sprawling gray-blue foliage. It's offset by white flowers that smell of honey when they're in season. And it's a nectary for pollinators, and it blooms for a number of weeks in the early summer. Seakale has a long history. It has been loved as a culinary food since Neolithic times in its native Europe, where it grows wild on the seacoast of the British Isles from Spain to Finland. The roots were dug and roasted, and all parts of the plant are edible: the roots, shoots, leaves, the immature flower buds, which are the broccolis that we focused on. In Europe, and also in the 19th century, in the 18th and 19th century, where it was grown here in the US, it was often grown for the young shoots, which were blanched, where they would, the shoot is emerging in the spring, they'd be covered by a clay pot to exclude light. Or on the seashores, they would stack rocks around it to exclude light and make a very tender, sweeter white shoot. And like I said, it was once cultivated in the US, but has sort of gone into obscurity. But we focused on the broccolis, which you can see here in the photo, on the left in the plant and on the right harvested. The broccoli heads are more dispersed, and they're not as large as annual broccolis, but the broccolis are very robust, like broccolini, and you can see that we're sort of harvesting that tip that has the tender, like young kale-like leaves, and the broccolis there, and universally has been considered delicious by all the folks who have tried it.
All right, so we had 2 trial plots, one in Jeffersonville at the farm between. I saw an older photo there of John Hayden, and one at the East Hill Tree Farm at Plainfield. So the Jeffersonville planting, and this is the Jeffersonville planting, and these are pictures all of sort of year 1 and of establishment. So this is sort of a no-till trial plot. This site in particular, this is as I said, the farm between site. These pictures are a little confusing because there's actually 2 planting sites at this property, and these pictures are from both of them. One of them is in the river valley bottom, where there's more sandy soils, and the other one is up behind the old farm in heavier loamy soils. And we certainly found that the sandy soils are more effective. But here you can basically see, this no-till method for us looked like broad forking along row, spreading mineral amendments, spreading compost, digging out where we needed to, where we were directly planting Seakale transplants, which you can see the flags represent in this photo, folding over nursery fabric, And then in the lower left, you see us actually peeling back that fabric, maybe John peeling back that fabric in the fall, mulching with wood chip. And then the lower right, you see what those plants look like the next spring. So that's the year after they were planted in flower. And I'll pass it back to Aaron for the next slide.
Thanks, Graham. So here we're seeing years 1 through 4 at the farm between the site that Graham was just talking about. You can see we started with very small plants and they became quite substantial year 4. It's hard to see, but in the upper right, that tape measure is showing about 3.75 feet of spread on one of the plants. So we're seeing really hardy plants, and they get quite large and bushy. So we found the height and width is something you might want to consider in your planting. We sort of settled on somewhere between 2.5 and 3 feet as a decent plant spacing, considering the full size of the crowns. We found the plant to be extremely resilient. There was hardly any watering that occurred after the establishment year, even through some of these pretty dry summers that we've had. And it does spread by shallow roots. It's not an invasive spreader by any means, but it will over time form a thick bed, and the plants can be encouraged to multiply by cutting the roots, sort of dabbing a spade around through the bed to multiply that community faster. Anywhere that it hits and severs one of the horizontally spreading roots will send up a new plant. We'll move on to the next slide.
Just a few more minutes, so you know.
Thanks, Vern. So this is us propagating root cuttings for our second site where we didn't have access to already sprouted, to basically transplants. So this plant propagates very easily by root cuttings, generally 2 to 4 inches long, about 1/4 inch or more wide. The end of the root piece closest to the crown of the mother plant is what sprouts the leaves, whereas the basal end sprouts roots. There's a number of ways to propagate it, from in trays like this to directly in pots, as you see here. We then brought them from those pots into a nursery bed in the bottom, and then you can go to the next slide and you'll see us where we transplanted those at East Hill Tree Farm.
We go on the next slide. So we've also established through more traditional, we've done the no-till, we've done the tillage establishment. You could see the size of transplants there. Basically, amendments, well-drained soils, compost chips, some water to get them going, and then keeping the weeds under control is kind of what we're looking for success here. We'll move on.
All right, and this is just year 1, 2, and 3 at East Hill Tree Farm. So we didn't have 4 seasons here, but that picture on the far right is, very harvestable broccolis. So not in flower like the other picture, but just full on broccolis. We're really excited to see what they look like this spring, in this 4th spring. One thing with the tillage is it certainly needed more weeding than the no-till method. We'll go to the next slide and back to Aaron.
All right, so one of the things that we looked at measuring here, and I'll just sort of summarize, is we're looking at the yield of broccolis, marketable harvested broccolis in the spring. You get 1 yield off of the plant per year, where you were getting anywhere between 1.8 and 3.7 pounds per plant, which roughly was the equivalent of 65 to 133 pounds per 100 row feet. And also, I won't read through the numbers, but looked very promising when compared to like multiple times as productive as asparagus, and also rivaling annual broccoli and potentially exceeding it. And I will also say we're very, there are a lot more measurements that need to be taken with the harvest as well. And there is no cover needed for the Seakale for the winter. We have very little or zero winter kill when it's in well-drained soils.
Here we go. So part of our research was also getting in touch with chefs, caterers, folks to prepare the food, try it out. And I think what's most notable here for you all to take away is that this really is something people are familiar with. It looks a lot like broccoli, tastes a lot like broccoli. For a grower, you get it the last week of May. You get these beautiful bunches of broccoli showing up in the CSA at a time of year where people aren't used to seeing broccoli. We didn't see any issues with flea beetles with sweet midge. I've seen flea beetles on this plant, but there's like this waxy cuticle, which almost, it seems like they just can't do any damage to it, which is sort of one of the great advantages of is the pest resiliency of this plant compared to brassicas and more annual brassicas. And I'll pass the last slide over to Aaron.
Yeah, so we we'll drop a link in the comments here. But like Graham said, we have not seen any pest damage from the Seakale. And also our contacts around the region, one of whom is in Upper Mass and has been growing it for 20 years, has never seen any significant pest damage on his plants either. So is another reason that we were very interested in it. We'll drop a link in the chat to our page at UVM, and you can find ongoing information there. We have a crop guide that we put together for the Seakale, and we're going to be doing some events this spring as well for some tasting of Seakale, along with another 2 plants that we've been looking at, which is a perennial spinach vine, which is basically what it's self-describing. It's a spinach-like leaf that grows on a vine for early spring harvest, and also hosta shoots in the spring, which are quite delicious.
Great. Thanks so much. Tons of information there, but seems pretty promising and pretty exciting. What better way to achieve no-till than not have to plant every year?